Hi, I'm Jill Deacon. Welcome to this week's episode of A Love Affair with the Unknown. So, here's a question for you. When you go out to a restaurant for dinner, do you always order the same thing on the menu? You know, that mushroom risotto that you love. Or do you take a flyer and try a new dish on the menu? Science journalist Alex Hutchinson would like to recommend the chef's special, no matter how much you love the risotto. The New York Times bestselling author of Endure has a new book called The Explorer's Gene: Why We Seek Big Challenges, New Flavors, and the Blank Spots on the Map. Alex says that exploration and trying new things, leaning into uncertainty, is what makes us feel most alive, and he has the research to prove it. Alex Hutchinson, welcome to A Love Affair with the Unknown. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks, Jill. I'm excited to be here.
So you you have said, and I love this, and I wanted to start here. You have said, listen, and this is, I think, what one takes away from your book. Listen to that inner voice telling you to try something and take risks in pursuit of something because you never know what you might find. Now, that's the kind of thing that some people might say as kind of a you go girl sort of bromide. But you've got the research to back it up. Tell me, and we will unpack some of it, but tell me off the top, what gives you the confidence to say that?
Well, let me start with all the caveats and say sometimes if you listen to that voice, things will go terribly wrong. And there are lots of explorers who are
Your
not
book doesn't
famous.
come with any guarantees,
Yes, exactly. Read the fine
like
print at
everything
the
else in
back of the
life.
book, to avoid litigation. Yeah, look, lots of explorers, if they didn't sail off the edge of the earth, they did not return to tell their tale. So I am not saying that it's all unicorns and ponies and wonderful things if you explore. I am saying that on a fundamental level, we're wired to explore. And if you look at the evolutionary history of not just our species, but of life itself, and the biology of how our brains are wired, we're wired to want to learn about the world in order to survive. We're wired to, and so and we're wired in a way that gives us a kind of internal bonus, an uncertainty bonus when that leads us to want to wander down the path we haven't wandered down before. Sometimes that path is good, sometimes it's bad, but we can't help being curious what's down that path.
What's an uncertainty bonus?
Right. So yeah, not to dive right into the jargon, but the uncertainty bonus is the idea that if you're weighing two options and they're nominally kind of equivalent, you don't know which one's best. If you were to try and if life was a series of bets, it would make sense to bet on the path to add a little to be more likely to bet on the path that you don't know about, to open the door that you don't know what it's behind, because then you learn something. Like, let's say you're playing a game show where it's like, pick one of these doors and you'll get a prize, and you know a little bit about each door, but one door you just don't know what's behind it. You should be more inclined to pick that door. And what it turns out is that when you test people in the lab, or if you observe them in the real world, it turns out that we are wired that way, to have a little uncertainty bonus in our brains, that all else being equal, we would rather find out about the thing we don't know about.
Hmm. Yeah, because you say that exploration is a precondition of life, which uh, can you explain what you mean by that?
There's an idea in neuroscience that has become a kind of the major theme in neuroscience in the last 20 years has been the idea that the brain is trying to predict the world around us, that the brain is basically a prediction engine. And this isn't just about humans. This is also about amoebas, and anything that wants to live has to try and um, has to know what's coming around the corner in order to prepare for it, to survive, to run away, to fight, whatever the case may be, or to figure out where food is. And so we don't want surprises. We want to be able to know what's coming. And in order to know what's coming, you have to be uh, you can't just lock yourself in the closet and say, I know what's coming, nothing, because I'm going to stay in this closet. You won't survive long. You have to be learning about the world.
Mm.
So this has been sort of extended or proposed as kind of the fundamental uh, principle of living things is that you have to be exploring. You have to be drawn to finding out about the world so that you can learn about the world and predict it effectively, which is what keeps us alive.
Allows us to evolve as a species. It's so interesting too because as you know, we all know there is we on the one hand, we are evolutionarily wired to feel more comfortable with the familiar because we have survived thus far by, taking the right path in the woods to avoid the wildebeest or whatever, and we are more comfortable in the familiar. And yet that's so interesting to think that we have to, and we kind of know that we have to get out of the closet and try new things, and yet we still resist it. It's a funny paradox, isn't it?
Yeah, and so when I start sort of waxing enthusiastically about we're wired to explore, I know for a lot of people that lands kind of falsely because, well, actually, I kind of find the unknown scary, and it's like me too. Trust me, like so we're pulled between these two, um, you know, the desire to avoid uncertainty and the desire to pursue it. And I think there's a couple of important points to make. One is that when I say we love exploring, I don't mean we love that feeling of not knowing what the heck is going to happen necessarily. We love uncertainty as a path to learning about the world. So we love the feeling of resolving uncertainty, of finding out what's behind that door. The other point about that is this tension between, um, you know, wanting to stick with the familiar and wanting to, plunge into the wilderness. It's it's kind of you can think of it as a tension between the present and the future. That in the present we would like to feel secure and like we know what's going on and there's no surprises, but that's equivalent. So in cognitive science, there's this famous paradox called the dark room, or this problem called the dark room problem, which is kind of what I was alluding to earlier. That if you really want to be able to predict what's going to happen next, you should just lock yourself in the closet. That gives you present moment security. You know what's going to happen right now, but you don't learn about the world, and so it's not a good way of ensuring that you know what's going to happen in the long term. So the drive to explore is the drive to feel confident and know about the world in the future and in the long term. And so when we say I'd like to stay in the known within what I've done before, but I also feel drawn to explore the unknown. What we're also saying is the future is important to me, or the present is important to me, but I also want to make sure that the future is productive and valuable and interesting. And so exploring is kind of a vote for the future.
Hmm. Oh, I love that line. Let's put that on a t-shirt. Um, what's happening in our brains when we tread new ground and try new things and take those risks, even if we aren't sure what might happen? Just tell me a little bit about what you've learned about what happens that is the payoff that you write about.
Yeah, I mean, one way of understanding what happens in our brains is to talk about dopamine, which is, it gets a lot of airtime these days as what's driving our behavior for better or worse. The key thing to understand about dopamine. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say because people loosely think of, dopamine as sort of the happy hormone, the feel-good chemical in the brain, and I think you're referring to the idea that, a lot of the problems people, attribute to sort of the anxious generation is or whatever age we may be, being on technology, and we get that instant hit of dopamine. "Oh, look, I got a like on my Instagram story." There's a hit of dopamine that's keeping people and getting people addicted to technology, but that's the I think, maybe general understanding of what dopamine is, but you're saying there's sort of more it's more nuanced than that.
Exactly. This idea, and I think we all like it, that's how I've internalized the idea that, oh, dopamine is, this hit of pleasure. The, I think the key thing that I came away with understanding is that you don't get a hit of dopamine when something is good. You get a hit of dopamine when something is better than expected. So it's actually a marker of prediction error. And so you can think about this in terms of addiction. Say it's like if you take a drug and you get a feeling that you've never experienced before, uh, there's a prediction error there. It's better than you expected, and dopamine is the brain's way of saying, "Wow, check this out. Remember this for next time. Do it again." But the 10th time you take that drug, there's no more prediction error because you know exactly what it's going to feel like, and so you no longer get that hit of dopamine because it's not a pleasure chemical; it's a prediction error chemical. And so then you have to, take a bigger dose or try a new drug or whatever. And so and that's part of the cycle of addiction. It's also so dopamine in that sense drives exploration because if you want to have the feeling of wow, that was better than I expected or that was different than I expected, that taking the road less traveled, going down, opening the door that you don't know what's behind it, that's a way of experiencing that feeling of oh, here's something I didn't expect. But the problem is, as you alluded to, social media these days, it's kind of wired to simulate the feeling of exploration, to give you as you scroll down your TikTok feed or whatever, it's like, oh, I don't know what the next video is going to. What's this going to be? Oh, that's different than I expected.
Mm.
So it's
Wow.
kind of tickling that circuitry, but without the substance of exploration. You don't learn about the world. You just have the sort of illusion that you're discovering something new.
Oh, I just hadn't even thought about that. The idea of it's mimicking, it's like a simulation of exploring, to be swiping and scrolling and seeing what's just below the bottom of your screen, and we're hooked to see what comes next by that very quality in us that has allowed us to evolve this far as a species. That's really dark. Wow.
Yeah, and when you think about some of the characteristics of social media and the fact that it's sort of hard to like, how does this algorithm work? What is it going to show me next? Why can't I just sort of see a feed of the people that I chose to like? Why are you feeding me these unpredictable things? The unpredictability is part of the addictiveness. You just don't know what's going to be next.
So, is comfort with the unfamiliar and unexplored? I mean, you said that there are certain people who will have more comfort, well, sitting on their couch scrolling, thank you very much, or their own version of that dark closet. Um, Versus, you're an elite athlete, you do trail running and distance running and big hikes that you've written about in the book with your including with your kids, which I wanna ask you about. But, there are people for whom that is an absolute bridge too far. But is getting more comfortable with exploring anything, new and different, something that we can cultivate? Can we change our resting state about that?
I think we can, but I also think it's worth um, having a broader definition of what it means to explore. So, uh, when I would tell people I was writing a book on exploration, lots of people would say, "Oh, that sounds interesting," in a polite way. Of course, I'm not an explorer, and what I took that to mean is that they had no interest in like parasailing to the South Pole or whatever the case may be, and that's fine. Like that because exploration and risk get tied together a lot as, but it's not the same thing. And so I would argue that there are lots of people who might have zero interest in going backpacking with me, but would be uh, you know really searching and enjoying seeking new things in the foods they cook, in the books they read, in the music they listen to. So our drive to explore isn't necessarily tied to like a physical exploration. In fact, the parts of the brain where we map new territories. So in the hippocampus, we form what's called cognitive maps, which is literally, you can trace your path uh, through unknown terrain by the way neurons light up because it's a literal map of neurons in your hippocampus. We use that same machinery to map ideas, to map how close ideas are to each other in different dimensions and what the paths between different concepts are. So exploration is a general concept. Whether the physical exploration or the cognitive exploration came first in evolution is actually something that scientists are still arguing about. It's not clear. But the modern upshot is that um, it's not just about going to the South Pole. It's about being open to new experiences and ideas.
So, what I think I hear you saying, and I'm asking this, I'm not trying to be disingenuous, but I will say this is something I believe in very much, and am so interested in exploring in this podcast, having quit my job to do this and other new things. I absolutely am fascinated by this, but am I right in interpreting what you're saying as the more we open ourselves up to new ingredients in the food we cook, uh, paths home from our regular job, uh, you know, trying a new, learning a new language, whatever it may be, the more we open ourselves up to the unfamiliar and the things we haven't done yet before, are you saying that that also opens up our our minds and literally like being open-minded to new ideas and new creative ways of thinking and being in the world?
Yes, I think that's a defensible proposition. I think that's a good way of saying it. For one thing, we were talking before about the tension between, wanting to stick with the known and venture into the unknown. Um, it the more you do it, the more comfortable you are with the idea of getting uncomfortable, of facing uncertainty. And also the more you explore, the more paths open up to you to explore. There's a concept called expanding the adjacent possible, which is this is an idea.
Another T-shirt.
Exactly. Yeah. This is a so this was an idea proposed by a guy named Stuart Kaufman in the 1990s, but people have or researchers have studied it and say, okay, so how do people decide what music to listen to in Spotify or something, or how do new articles get written on Wikipedia? And sort of across a lot of domains, what you find is that when you take one new step into the unknown, like let's say you listen to a song you've never listened to before, that's likely to be, one step from stuff you've got the music you already know, and you don't just pick a random song. You're like, well, I liked this music, maybe this other song that is sort of like it, or that is in a similar genre or by a similar artist. You try that. And when you listen to that new song, all of a sudden that opens up a bunch of new adjacent things. You can say, well, on this album, there were these artists. Maybe I should try some of their music. And so the more you try, the more paths you have to keep expanding your experiences. So I think there's a sense in which momentum builds. Whereas if you don't try new things, you always have the same options. Whereas once you try new things, it becomes sort of exponential. The more you try, the more opportunities you have to venture into the unknown, and the more comfortable you get with that idea.
I also think you can expand from that into the more, I wrote about this a while ago because I was thinking about the idea of patience and how, I mean, we were talking about the dopamine hits that people can get from technology, and I'm so curious about, the way that our highly curated, polished, algorithmically determined world right now can maybe erode our comfort with the unfamiliar and other things that come with it, like patience, tolerance, empathy, because the more you get comfortable with your own feelings of, whoa, I don't know where I am. I haven't ever cooked with these smelling foods before or whatever. The more you experience your own um, unfamiliarity with something, and then you kind of get used to it, you have more compassion for other people's for difference, I think, and for other people's who may be in, circumstances, who people who may be feeling uncomfortable in their, you know what I mean? Do you think I feel like there's a long list of arguments for keeping an open mind and trying new things.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. I think what it makes me think of is like if you travel to another country in a place where, let's say, to a place where people don't speak English very much, because these days you can travel a lot of places and you just assume that everyone speaks English, and so you don't even bring a phrase book. But you go somewhere where English is uncommon, um, you realize how hard it is to get around in the world uh, when you don't uh, kind of already know all the rules, all the roots, all the languages. And I think you're right. That gives you compassion. Then you come back and you realize, you see this, someone who's just arrived in the country, either as a tourist or as a new immigrant. Like, oh man, this must be hard.
Mm.
They're on the subway. They don't even know how to read what the stops are. So I think that's definitely sort of a connection or understanding how other people may be feeling when they're exploring. You also mentioned this, this idea of algorithmically driven exploration,
Yeah.
and I think that's a really important, uh, like a really, really important. I should emphasize that. Draw some underlines under that uh, concept and thing to be kind of worried about, because one argument would be that social media is like the greatest form of exploration there is. Boy, I never would have known, that cats could do that or whatever if I wasn't scrolling through TikTok. Um, but I think there's a difference between uh, having an algorithm suggest things that you might like versus following your curiosity versus trying to figure out what you might like to know about. And this is important on a lot of levels. But the analogy that I would use is like, if you're driving in a car, let's say two people are driving in a car, you're driving through an unfamiliar city, you get to your destination, and then you say, okay, let's find our way back. The person who drove that car is going to have a pretty good chance of figuring out how to get back through the city because they were paying attention. They were looking at the landmarks, trying to figure out where they were going. The person who was sitting in the passenger seat chatting away, um, they saw everything. The windshield was the same. It's not that they as I'm reading rereading Sherlock Holmes right now, and one of his observations is, Watson, you see, but you do not observe. And I think that's a great
Ah.
way of explaining what happens if you're sitting in the passenger seat of a car. You see all the same things, but you don't observe. And so the way to observe is to be active in your exploration, to be making choices that have consequences, as opposed to just having the world kind of flow by in front of you as if on a screen. And so I think um, that's what algorithmically driven exploration is. That's what being on the internet and just having the internet spoon feed you titillating videos is. You do learn interesting things and you do see cute videos and stuff, but you're not following your own interests. And your own interest, your own curiosity is the most powerful or the most accurate guide to what would be the best way for you to learn about the world.
So do you think that we're becoming less comfortable and less prone to not just going on extreme hikes as you do, but just trying new things and having an open mind?
I do think there's in particular there's a risk of homogenization that if we're all being guided by the same algorithms, um, we're being exposed to lots of new things, but we're being exposed to fundamentally the same things by the same algorithms. And so how do you get new ideas? How do you come up with something genuinely uh, different and original and creative if your thoughts are just following the breadcrumbs laid out by an algorithm? So yeah, I do think that's a concern.
And I read that you say exploration's never been more important as we face shifts in technology, society, and climate. Can you expand on that? What is what do we gain? I guess what I'm getting at is what do we gain in addition to that greater sense of, observe and feeling alive by observing the route and not just seeing it. But what do we gain? Why is it important for us to do all this in the face of not just the algorithms coming for us, but a shifting climate, all the massive changes happening in our world? Why, in this context, is it important for us to continue to explore?
Yeah, so I'll just zooming back a little or stepping back a little. I'll say there's kind of two when people ask me like why explore. There's kind of two ways I can answer the question. One is that it feels good, or it feels fulfilling and meaningful and yada yada yada, and the other is that it gets us good things. So there's a utilitarian answer and a hedonistic answer or whatever. So I like the it feels good answer. Like I like in my own life, I'm like, well, what am I fundamentally trying to do here with these years I have available? I'm trying to have them feel meaningful and fulfilling and fun. But there's absolutely a utilitarian argument, and so I'll start with a simple example. You talked right at the top about the classic explore exploit dilemma of sitting in a restaurant and do you order what you know you like or what you don't know about. So in this modern world, we have huge data sets from like food delivery companies. And some researchers from Harvard did an analysis of, I think it was 1.6 million orders from a company called Deliveroo, which is kind of like Uber Eats in Europe. And long story short, they found that if you order from a new restaurant or someone you haven't ordered from before, on average, you will get what you consider a worse meal than if you stick with one of your old favorites. You will rate it, you will give it a lower rating than if you stuck with one of your old standbys.
Hmm.
So it's like, exploring sucks. But over time, if you persist in exploring, your ratings will gradually increase because over time, you'll get some good meals from exploring and you'll get some bad meals from exploring. The bad meals, you never go back to that place. The good meals, you add them to your rotation. And so your rotation of usual favorites just gradually gets better and better over time. So that's the fundamental utilitarian argument for exploring, is that you accept a short-term risk of a bad meal in exchange for the long-term promise that you're going to get better and better meals overall. Now, there's a specific thing. You mentioned climate and why, like, now it's more important than ever. It's also the case that exploring becomes more valuable when when the conditions are shifting. So let's say, in the restaurant context, let's say you're in a city where everything just kind of stays the same. Restaurant, chefs stay in restaurants for decades at a time. So you try a restaurant and it's bad, you never go back because it's always going to be bad. And you try one that's good, you stay there because it's always going to be good. If you imagine a sort of different world where there's a lot of turnover in the restaurant business and it's like every 6 months restaurants get a new chef, then just because you tried a restaurant once doesn't mean it's going to be bad later. You have to keep exploring to find out, is this one still bad? Is this one still good? And there's real world evidence, without going too far down the rabbit hole, because I realize that this has already been like a 15-minute answer to your question. But there's, for example, one of the case studies that I found really interesting was about longline fishing off the coast of Florida. They in 2009, they shut down the longline fishing grounds for 6 months because there was the dolphin population needed to recover. And longline fishing, it happens, there's a ton of data on it because the GPS, the positions of all the boats are tracked with GPS, and how much fish they catch is always is tracked carefully too. And so you could analyze the performance of fishing boats and say some of them are real explorers. They go different places every day to fish. And some of them are more exploit. They have their favorite places and they go and fish. And whether it's a good day or bad day, they stick in their usual place. What happened when they shut down some of the prime fishing grounds is, and it didn't matter. So there were different ways of being a good longline fishing boat. You could explore, you could exploit. There were different ways of achieving a pretty good level of fishingness or whatever. When change came, when they shut down the fishing grounds, the boats that had previously been explorers were fine. They still knew how to adapt to find new places to fish, and they kept on fishing. The boats that were exploiters, the ones who always went to the same, they were like, what the hell do we do now? And a lot of them just stopped fishing for the duration of the shutdown. So I think that's a metaphor for in times of change and disruption, and by God, we're living through times of change and disruption, having that exploring mindset allows you can't assume that what worked yesterday will work tomorrow. And so exploring is a way of buffering against that.
And I hear you, it sounds like this is an argument for doing this on a regular basis. Like it's almost like adopting this as a mindset of open to trying things. Being open to trying here's another way of saying it. I think what I hear you saying. If you're open to rolling with what comes and being open to the possibility that might lie in what comes and curiously exploring what comes, that's another way of letting go of control and trying to ensure that things are exactly how you wanted them to be in the same way they were yesterday, which is a really trying to maintain control and certainty, and the same as it was yesterday, comfort in this moment is a real recipe for distress, which is, it's part of why I love having these conversations, is exploring all that we're going through and the ways to think about it. So is that kind of a fair assessment of what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And another way to put it is it's a way of building resilience to change, to being ready to handle change. That even if right now you don't necessarily need to be exploring, if you have that habit, if you're developing that habit, if we go back to these fishing boats, it's like Once the shutdown came, you could easily say, well, now everyone should just explore. But some of the boats were not used to exploring. They hadn't built that, or the captains or whatever had not built that ability, that set of skills of handling, like, oh, well, we're just going to try somewhere different today. And here's what we do when we're going somewhere unfamiliar. So
Hmm.
you can't wait until the crisis comes to say, now we're going to adapt to the crisis. But if you're open to new things and exploratory, and as you said, not expecting everything to stay under control, everything to stay as you planned it, uh, then when things inevitably don't go as you planned them, you'll be better prepared. Which doesn't mean that it's going to be easy or that you've eliminated all the problems. It just means you're better able to handle it.
I feel like you've been, training for this for a long time. I'm remembering a piece in the book where you mentioned playing sushi roulette with your friends or your brothers, I can't remember. Can you tell that story?
Yeah, this
What is
was
sushi roulette?
sushi roulette. I was living in Australia about 15 years ago. My wife was going to medical school there, and we went out to a restaurant with friends there. And one of the features of this restaurant was this idea of sushi roulette, where basically you order a round for the table of salmon rolls, except that one of the rolls has been hollowed out, with the salmon taken out and is completely crammed full of wasabi, with then a little bit of salmon to shield it. And the idea is kind of like doing shots. You pop the salmon roll in your mouth, and one person ends up screaming in agony. And it sounds stupid. I as I describe this, I'm like, how could anyone think this is a good idea? Why am I celebrating this? And as I was remembering this when I was writing the book, I was Googling, like, is this place still around? And it is. And I think there's a place in Chicago too where you can do sushi roulette. But it was just it was so fun and yet so inexplicable. I couldn't rationally explain why one would want to take a chance of ingesting a really large dose of wasabi. But there was something about that feeling of there's just that feeling of the anticipate. It's not the putting it in your mouth that's fun. It's the feeling of what's going to happen.
Right, I mean, if you imagine, no matter how one feels about sushi or risk or anything, just I think it's pretty safe to say that if you envision 2 evenings, a group of friends sitting around having sushi and a group of friends sitting around playing sushi roulette, I mean, it's just it electrifies the moment. It does make it come to life in a way that somebody's gonna have a mouthful of pain, um, but yeah, that kind of, drilling into why that is electrifying is is pretty fascinating, and so let me go from there to the idea of you are, as I mentioned, you're a long distance runner, you're an avid, intrepid, hiker and adventurer, and you've written in the book about taking your kids on some long hikes in challenging weather. Tell me why you include your young kids on these ambitious treks. I mean, besides, a love of nature and being outdoors, what are you wanting them to learn and to come away with and a practice for life?
Yeah. So believe me, my wife and I have long conversations about this, and part of it is trying to unpack, like, what are our real motivations? Are we doing this for the kids, for ourselves? Are we justifying what we wanted to do anyway? Because I mean, the most superficial answer would be, my wife and I have always loved backpacking, and we want to keep going backpacking. And there's nobody
And
who's
we
willing to
can't get
take
a
our kids for a
babysitter for
week.
2 weeks.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, hey, kids, you're gonna have a character building experience, and yeah, we're doing it for your sake, so that you'll be, learning these. So for sure, there's a little bit of that. That's just like, that's what we love to do. Um, but we've put our kids in some challenging situations, like from a quite a young age, and um, and so we've had to grapple with the fact that, hey, we chose to do this. They didn't. We just dragged them along. And so, and maybe another theme that's important to think about. It's like, what's the difference between exploring voluntarily and being thrust into uncertainty involuntarily? And those are two different things. I mean, there's a lot of overlap, but, you know, um, I'm thinking particularly in the context of something like cancer diagnosis or long COVID, that it's reframing it as, as exploring is interesting, but you don't want to oversimplify it. And so I think for my kids, again, it's like we have to be really careful because they're not making the choice to do this. That said, they're now old enough. My kids are now 9 and 11 that that we can have conversations with them when we're out on a trip and it's getting hard, and we can say, listen, like, okay, we right now we're out in the middle of the wilderness, and so everyone has to keep walking because that's how we're getting out. But we can have honest conversations. But do we want to do this next year, or what level of challenge do we want to undertake? And particularly for my younger daughter, who's obviously younger by definition, like, and she's sort of having to grapple with these things, and you can really see that sort of present versus future uh, dynamic playing out in her head because she's sometimes very challenged by the things we're doing. But boy, you make it to the end of the day of the hike, and she is just so like so proud, so excited, so interested in what she's done. And like you were saying about the sushi roulette, it's like I've had a lot of dinners in a lot of restaurants over the years, and most of them I can't even remember. Like I remember nothing about, but by God, I remember sushi roulette. And it's the same with uh, these challenging explorations, hikes, backpacking trips. It's like my kids may not remember much about like the rock climbing camp they went to, but they remember the 10 hours in the mud when we were hiking, and this is when they were like 3 and 5 or something. And we were hiking in Algonquin Park and we just got absolute torrential rain. It's like one of their main memories. I don't know how positive the memory is, but it's like, it, 10 hours in the mud became a mantra in our family. It's like, if something's going wrong, hey, it's better than 10 hours in the mud, right? And the kids laugh, and it's like, so, there's more to it than just exploring there, because there's also kind of the meeting challenge and facing that. But I think, yeah. So when we take them on these trips, they don't know, like we don't know it, like we don't know how the day is going to transpire. We've never been to this mountain range before or whatever. We don't know what the weather's going to be. And I hope as they grapple with these sorts of challenges, um, it sounds trite to say, but I think that it's helping to teach them that they're capable of way more than they might imagine they would be. That if they were just sort of sitting on the sofa, as they imagine they might like to be watching videos on the iPad, they would not get as much out of that week.
How does all of this apply to, this idea of all the benefits of trying new things and taking risks and building that resilience? How does that apply, in the face of uncertainty that we don't choose? I mean, you mentioned it in the example of the fishers and the ones that were more comfortable with being open to other options and exploring, were better able to handle sort of a crisis, an existential crisis that they didn't choose. But there is so much uncertainty in the world right now that doesn't feel fun. That's, existentially terrifying from, all the things you mentioned. What would you say to people who think, well, sure, it's great to go on a hike and build up your confidence in handling the next hike, but what about the economy and my family not being able to, function if I can't keep my job? Like the uncertainty that people face on so many levels right now. How does all of this apply in those situations to the uncertainties that we don't choose?
Yeah. So the first thing to say, I think, is that they are different, right? Like, and it would be insulting to say that, oh, you should be able to handle, losing your job. But like, I went on a hike last week and it was pretty hard. This is not what I'm saying. And I do think like, I mean, I don't know if autonomy is the word I'm looking for, but having the freedom to make your own, like choosing to undertake something hard is very different from having something hard thrust upon you. So they're not the same thing. And this idea that exploration is this joyful voyage into the unknown, that's not going to apply in the same way to climate change destroying your economy or whatever, to really negative things. So let's not pretend that it's the same. However, there's a lot of overlap in the Venn diagram in terms of uh, what the skills are we need to navigate these sorts of experiences. Because even if you choose to undertake something hard, or something unknown, you still have to. It's still going to require um, a set of skills and mental perspectives, and that's going to help get you through it. And those are similar to the mental perspectives and the skills that will get you through involuntary exploration, if we can coin a term there. So I think there's overlap, and I also think, you know, one of the scientists I interviewed in writing the book is a Danish guy named Mark Malmdorf Anderson, who's uh, a theorist of play, which I think sounds like a pretty cool job. He's a cognitive scientist who writes about play. And so, one of the questions I was asking him and a lot of other people is like, okay, play is important for kids, free play, exploration. Um, you know, so, well, first of all, I was asking, should adults play? We need to tell adults play more. And that's a complicated question. But I was like, okay, you have young kids similar to my age. How do you bring up your kids? What am I supposed to do? And he was really strongly of the belief that, first of all, you going back to an idea I talked about earlier, you let the kids choose how they want to explore. So what's interesting to them is that's the definition of what's a useful way of playing. So if they want to go up the slide instead of down the slide, that's where play is for them. That's what they want to discover about the world. So what he strongly believed is that letting kids explore and take on risk, it gives it starts to give them the skills they'll need to handle bigger risks and involuntary risks later in life. And that this is, you mentioned the anxious generation and this idea that um, kids these days are, not to get into the whole parenting discussion, but as they're not having opportunities to take risks, to explore in ways that turn out badly, they're not learning to deal with these relatively minor, in the most part, disappointments or fears or uncertainties. And so they don't develop the skills to handle the much more serious uncertainties and challenges they're going to face as adults. And so, back to your original question, I think cultivating an openness to new ideas, a willingness to sit with uncertainty voluntarily, is going to help develop the same skills that you will inevitably need at some point in your life to deal with involuntary uncertainty.
Wow. Lots, so much to explore in your book. Pun intended. Sorry about that. I forgot to write down all our T-shirt slogans.
Yeah.
They were so good. Involuntary exploration is one of them, but there's just so many, cool turns of phrase and really powerful thoughts that we can really take to heart. And I love the idea that this exploration can start this afternoon, the different route, walking your dog, like just being open-minded and curious in whatever parts of life can really build up a muscle that will help us in the rest of life. Alex, such a treat to talk with you about this. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me, Jill.